Okay, hello and welcome to the next event in the Westbury Memorial Public Library Virtual Author Series. I just ask everybody at this time to put it on mute, and later on when we ask questions, then you could take it off mute and everything like that. Uh, so so then when it's question and answer time, you can take yourself off of mute. You can you raise your hand up, icon up, and then once I see it in the order that it comes up, then I will have you ask your question. I'm excited to speak to author Nicola Harrison. Let me share a little more about her. Nicola Harrison is the author of 3 novels, Montauk the Showgirl and Hotel Laguna, her latest. She was born and raised in England and moved with her family to Southern California when she was 14. She is a graduate of UCLA and receives her MFA from Stony Brook University. Prior to writing novels, she worked as a fashion journalist in New York City, where she lived for 17 years. Now she resides in Manhattan Beach, California with her husband, 2 sons, and a high-maintenance Chihuahua puppy named Lily. Hello, Nicole. Thank you so much for agreeing to do this virtual author visit with the Westbury Memorial Public Library. I'm excited to discuss your book, Hotel Laguna. This was a fabulous book. Can you please just briefly tell us a little about your book, spoiler-free, of course. This way we can give the audience members who haven't read the book yet a little introduction to the book.
Sure. Well, thanks so much for having me. I'm thrilled to be here. I always love talking to readers. I sit alone with my computer for so long working on these books, and then it's so nice to actually be able to talk about them when they come out. So for those of you who haven't read it yet, without any spoilers, Hotel Laguna is set in 1946, and it tells the story of a young woman, Hazel Francis, who has left her home in Wichita, Kansas, and moved to Los Angeles, California to work at Douglas Aircraft as one of the Rosie the Riveters during World War II. She loves the work, she's thriving in the position, and then the war's over, the men return home to their jobs, and the women are no longer needed. And she's told, thank you so much, but now you can go back to being a housewife and a mother. And Hazel is not a housewife or a mother. She doesn't really have much of a home to go back to. So kind of out of desperation, she ends up in Laguna Beach, California, and takes a job working with a cantankerous old artist, Hanson Radcliffe, who turns out is actually very famous. And he's haunted by a scandal from his past. And so Hazel ends up getting very involved in the art world because Laguna Beach is a little bohemian artist community. And she gets involved in the art world, specifically the pageant of the masters, which I'll talk more about later. And she becomes kind of obsessed with figuring out the mystery behind her boss's scandalous past. And she tries to enlist the help of a very handsome bartender, Jimmy, who works at Hotel Laguna. But ultimately, it's a story of friendship and determination and the realization that one small decision can change the course of your life in the most unexpected ways.
Very good. What themes were you looking to explore in this book?
Oh, well, I was fascinated in the women who were working in these positions during World War II, helping build airplanes. And, also when I started learning about these women, and I knew what Rosie the Riveters were, but I didn't know in depth how much they had done. That 6 million women on the home front had helped, to win the war, working in shipyards and airplane factories and ammunition plants. And so I became really fascinated with that. And I realized as I was started to learn about these women that my husband's grandmother, Grandma Ruth, had worked as a Rosie the Riveter. And I didn't know that before. And I was surprised that my husband hadn't told me this before when I write historical fiction for a living. So I learned a lot more about her life from my mother-in-law. And then I went on to interview real life Rosie the Riveters, who I was lucky enough to meet in real life. A few of them I got to interview them. And so that was, that was really what I wanted to explore in this book. And also, themes of loyalty and friendship and love.
That's great. What was the origin of this novel?
So I started writing this book or I started thinking about wanting to write a book like this in the beginning of 2020. So as you know, that was COVID. I was living on the East Coast at the time, and we were on lockdown. And usually at this early stage of writing a book, I would want to start to, maybe travel to the place that I want to write about and, go to the library there and do some sort of on the ground research because that sort of gets things going for me and interviewing locals and that kind of thing. But of course, I couldn't do that. And so I thought to myself, well, where do I want to live in my imagination for the next year or 2 years or however long it takes me to write this next book? And I kept coming back to the idea of Laguna Beach. So Laguna Beach is in Southern California, and I lived there. It was right after college. It was the first time I had like my own little apartment with no roommates, and I had my first, salaried job, and I felt, my first taste of real independence. But also, both of my parents are artists, and my dad does oil paintings, and my mom does watercolors, and they have both exhibited in the galleries and the art festivals in Laguna Beach. So I had a little bit of the behind the scenes knowledge of the art world and this artist community. And also I had a glimpse into some of these quirky artist characters who were their friends. So I thought that would be a fun place to set a novel. But then I had to figure out what I wanted it to be about. And that's when I settled on the place and the time period, that's when I started learning about the Rosies and my husband's grandmother. And so it all started to mesh into one.
That's great. Let's see. Um, well, being that you said that it was written during primarily during the pandemic and partly during shutdown, how did you go about doing research for the book?
Yeah, so at first it was tricky because a lot of it, just that initial research just had to be online. Um, like I said, I knew a lot about Laguna Beach already, but I didn't know about Laguna Beach back in the back in the 1940s. Um, and so I did a lot of research online, and I was in communication with a librarian in Laguna Beach. And so I would constantly be sending her questions, and she would send me, you know, sources and articles whenever she could. But it's not the same as getting into the library and really doing the digging and research and reading the books and memoirs and that kind of thing. So I ordered a lot of books online that I was able to read. But the best part of writing this book was when I was finally able to set foot in the Laguna Beach Library and meet this librarian, Nelda, who I'd been communicating with, and also I'd also been communicating with the Laguna Beach Historical Society. Um, so I went to this library in Laguna. This was once things started to open up, and I was masked, and she said, "Okay, you're only allowed to be in here like 30 minutes at a time." But I ended up staying for like 3 hours that day. And she brought me out this box, and she said, "I set a few things aside for you." And one of the things was the original program of the pageant of the Masters from 1946 that she had in her archives. And so I could talk about the pageant of the Masters in a second, but that was the big art festival that Hazel gets involved with in this book. And that having that document, it's like a magazine. It was more than just a pamphlet. It was like a magazine, and they had articles on how they put that show on, and they had the names of all the volunteers who were in the show. And one thing that was really helpful for me was they had advertisements throughout this brochure of all the local businesses in town at that time. And so I was able to envision, like, okay, where would my characters go out to dinner? Where would they go dancing? Where might they go out for a drink? And it's because I could see, incorporate real places that way. So that was really great. And then the other part of research that was so important to me, again, once we were able to get out and meet people, was I learned that there is an American Rosie the Riveter Association that their whole mission is this organization. They have chapters in all different states, and their whole mission is to preserve and celebrate the legacy of these women who worked to help, with the war effort on the home front during World War II. And I was like, who knew there was a Rosie the Riveter Association? Well, I got in touch with the California chapter, and I was able to meet three ladies. It was Helen, Rusty, and Phyllis, They were 102, 95, and 90. And I got to, they lived in this senior living home near where I live. And I got to go and meet with them and interview them and ask them about their experience working in the airplane factories at that time. And that was just so amazing. And they could remember so much too about, what they wore and what they did. And one of the women had been a true riveter, like a Rosie the Riveter. She worked the rivet gun, which fastened pieces of the aircraft together. One of them had worked on the hydraulic press, which is a huge piece of machinery that you pull down and it shapes the huge sheets of aluminum or metal into what becomes the aircraft. And then one of them was so petite, Helen, that they put her right in the nose of the aircraft. So she was able to get in there and do all the wiring and all that kind of stuff. And it was just really neat to talk to them about their jobs. And another part of the research, which was cool, you all know that famous poster that's like, we can do it. So the government would put out these posters and they would encourage women to sign up, to come and, take on these roles to help. But they also would put out these posters that would be like, if you know how to iron, then you'll be great at using the hydraulic press. Using a hydraulic press is just like ironing sheets of metal. It's just like ironing your laundry at home. And like, if you know how to sew, then you'll just be perfect at using a rivet gun because it's like sewing together sheets of metal. And it was so funny to see how they thought they had to like connect the domestic chores of women of that time in order to lure them to take on these jobs. So I rambled a lot about my research, but it was obviously such a big part of writing this book.
Oh, that's so fascinating to meet these women and everything and learn all about them. That just sounds so fascinating.
Yeah.
Well, since you brought it up, and I'm sure we all find it fascinating if you don't know too much about it. But the pageant, the Masters. I was wondering if you could share a little more about it and your background with it and everything like that.
Yeah. So the pageant of the Masters, for those of you who haven't read the book yet, it's almost hard to describe. You just got to go see it. But it's a big art show that they put on where they recreate famous works of art as vivant tableaus or living pictures, and they're life size, the size of the stage. And the final piece of art that they always do is the Last Supper. And so it used to be all locals from Laguna Beach who would volunteer to be in the show, and they would use makeup and costume and lighting to trick your eye into thinking that you're looking at a two-dimensional image of this famous work of art when really it's three-dimensional. And it's just a really unique show that you really can't see anywhere else. And I had been to it as a teenager with my parents, because I spent my teenage years in Southern California. But it wasn't until I started doing research for this book that I realized that it had been around for 90 years. And it started when in the 1930s, when the Los Angeles Olympics were going on in Los Angeles, and the artists in Laguna Beach, which is about an hour south of LA, they were like, hey, there's all these visitors coming to town for the Olympics from all over the place. How do we get them to know about Laguna Beach and about our artwork? And so they started this show where they started this very amateurish version of the pageant of the Masters, which I think at the time was basically like, a picture frame with someone sort of posing behind it. Maybe it was like the Mona Lisa or something like that. But as the years went on, more and more artists became involved and started painting the backdrops, and it became more and more professional. And now this show attracts 250,000 visitors every year. It's only on in the summer from I think July until September. And it's this huge draw, and it's just an amazing show. So if you ever get the opportunity to come to Laguna Beach and see the pageant of the Masters, I would highly recommend it. And so in my book, Hazel gets involved in putting on this show. And actually, in real life, the only time that the pageant of the Masters has not been on was the 4 years during World War II, because of course you couldn't have bright lights and large gatherings and anything that, could potentially be a target for enemies. And the only other time was 2020 for COVID. They didn't have it because obviously you couldn't have large gatherings. But other than that, it's gone on every single year.
Well, that's so interesting. I'll have to attend that one day. That sounds great.
Yeah. And actually, we had an event with Adventures by the Book, which in San Diego, which is part of Novel Network. where a group of women, and Debbie was there, and we went to Hotel Laguna, and we met there and had a drink and talked about the book, and then we went across the street and had some dinner, and then we all went to the pageant of the Masters and we saw the show together. So take your book club.
That
Field
sounds
trip.
amazing. Um, this novel could be looked at as a coming of age novel. What kind of journey did you want to take Hazel from the beginning of the book and to the end for her to discover her true self?
Yeah, I definitely saw it as a coming of age story also. I wanted her to, well, I don't know if I say I wanted her, but Hazel makes a lot of mistakes along the way also. I think she's like a flawed character, obviously. Um, as I said, she was inspired by my husband's grandmother because she also had lived in Wichita, Kansas, and moved to Los Angeles to work in Douglas Aircraft. But the similarities end there because my husband's grandmother actually went on to live a very happy life and had kids, and that's no fun to read about. You know, you have to throw some conflict and some struggles in your characters' lives because it makes for a good page turner. So so hey, I just thought of Hazel as, you know, struggling to find where she fit in the world, not wanting to be boxed into a predetermined role, and you know, sort of ahead of her time because a lot of women were boxed in and had certain expectations of them at that time, specifically after World War II, because they had taken on these jobs that were previously just reserved for men, um, jobs that were never available to them before, nor did these women know that they could do them because they'd never been given the opportunity. And it sort of opened the door for them. It also they paid well, and so it changed. It forever changed the American workforce for women this time because women were getting paid. They earned this new confidence and competence in themselves, and then what I wanted to explore with Hazel was how you're sort of then that door is closed all of a sudden, and you're expected to go back to this other life, and even more so, it was even more of an expectation at that time. Like, well, go back to, you've done this masculine work, but now go back to being feminine, and now go back to your domestic roles. And that's sort of like head spinning for women. And so I really wanted to explore that with Hazel. And I think with all of my books, I really just enjoy learning about women's history and how women's roles change throughout the decades. And often there is a swing back in a different direction after a big world event.
Yeah, that makes sense. What character was the most fun to write?
I would say Hanson Radcliffe, the cantankerous old artist. He was a lot of fun to write. I just had him in my mind. Like I just knew this character almost before I even started writing him. And a lot of people have asked me on these, you know, when I've done book talks, they've said that they put the book down and then they Googled him to see if he was a real person, which I take as a huge compliment because it means you know, I brought him to life for them. But he's actually not based on a real person. There certainly were famous artists at that time in Laguna Beach, and they're all part of the California Impressionist artist movement. You know, they were very inspired by the light in California, the bright sunshine, and you know, using these bold colors on the palette. And I could have written about a specific artist, but I didn't want to be tied to that, because if I wrote about a real life person, I'd be very tied to their specific life, what they did, how they spoke, and I wanted to have the freedom to create, you know, different scenarios for Hanson. And so I sort of based him on what I imagine an artist of that time. He was almost like an amalgamation of the different artists that I read about, but he wasn't based on any particular one. But he was a lot of fun to write because, you know, he's grumpy and he's mean, but I think, at least for me, by the end, you kind of fall in love with him a little bit in a fatherly kind of way.
Yeah, I like how you know he came across as really tough and everything. And we see he's kind of like in a sense he's a little bit of a softie, and he kind of has like a heart of gold. And
Yes, exactly.
in that. Um, also, what was there a character that was difficult to write?
Um, hmm. I don't don't know. I don't know if he wasn't, I'm gonna say Edgar. I wouldn't say he's necessarily difficult to write, but I just really wanted to strike the right balance with him. He's the other artist that is frenemies with with Hanson. Um, I wanted to strike the right balance, and I wanted there to be moments where you thought, oh, you know what? Hazel's just gonna go with him, or at least a moment when you thought there was potential that she might. Um, and then I wanted it to kind of swing back and forth a little. And so I guess getting the balance right with him was a bit of a challenge.
Um, did you know the ending for the book before you started, or did it come to you as you wrote the book?
That's a good question. I had a I think I knew the ending. It's sort of like a vague idea of the ending. And that seems to be the case with all of my books I've written so far. I tend to kind of know how I want it to end. Now, along the way, other things happen and characters come in that I didn't know were going to necessarily have a big role. And um, certainly, I'm like I'm not that they're in writing, and the authors often ask, are you a pantser, like fly by the seat of your pants, or a plotter, where you map everything out? And I'm not a pantser. I don't totally fly by the seat of my pants, but I'm not a strict plotter either. I kind of know the beginning and the middle and the end, and then I sort of meander along the way. But I did sort of end up in the place where I thought I would end up. Yeah. I'm a loose plotter, I would say.
Okay. Can you please share your journey to becoming a published writer?
Yeah, so I always loved to write. I studied English and creative writing in college. So I think I'm like one of the few people who actually like did a major, an English major, and then really applied it. But and then but I had a mentor in college. I went to UCLA, an author, Carolyn C. And she told us all about the writing world and the writing life. And one of the things that she said that stuck with me, she was like, now don't graduate and go out and immediately think that you're going to write a novel because you have nothing to say. You have to go out and you have to live your life and have some life experience and then come back and then a little later you might have something to say. And I remember taking that to heart. And so I did not try and write a novel when I was in my 20s. I moved to New York, but I did want to write. So I got into fashion journalism. I worked for magazines there. But even then, I was always taking a creative writing class on the side and dabbling with that. Um, and then eventually I completed my first manuscript, Montauk. And this was after I got I went back to school and got my master's in creative writing. But that was really, it wasn't that I necessarily felt like I needed to. It was more like I just wanted more time to write and more exposure to other writers and things like that. And then after that, I wrote my first book, Montauk, and it was time to get an agent. And I didn't know any agents. I didn't have any connections with literary agents, but I just thought to myself, well, um, which books have I read recently that I really liked? And let me look up and see who those agents are that represent those books, because if they like that book, maybe they'll like mine. And I thought, it doesn't necessarily need to be the same genre. And I had just read at that time Gone Girl. And so I sent it out to a few different agents, but it was the agent who represents Gone Girl who ended up becoming my agent. And then from there, she then sent it to some publishers, and I ended up going with St. Martin's Press. And at that time, I got a two-book deal. So it was for my first book, Montauk, and then the next book, which at the time I had no idea what that next book was going to be. And then that ended up being The Showgirl. And then after that, I got another two-book deal. So then that's Hotel Laguna and the next book. And the next book is what I'm working on right now.
Okay. Um, our audience and I love to hear book recommendations. Can you please share some books that you read recently that you can recommend?
Yes, I mean, I maybe you guys have read it also, but I just finished The Women by Kristen Hanna. And oh my gosh, it was so good. I keep thinking about it all the time. It's one of those books that's really just staying with me. Loved it so much. Uh, I also read recently What Wild Women Do by Karma. What's her last name? Karma, is it Brown? Oh my gosh. I'm gonna have to look it up. but then What Wild Women Do. And I was really interested in that because my second book, The Showgirl, even though that takes place in the 1920s and it's about a woman who's determined to become one of the Ziegfeld Follies, a lot of that book takes place up in the Adirondacks in upstate New York at one of these great camps, which is like a sort of very luxurious, they called them rustic retreats. And it was where a lot of the wealthy industrialists of the 20th century would set up their sort of family compounds and vacation homes up in the Adirondacks. And these became known as the Great Camps. And so a lot of that book takes place at one of these great camps. And then What Wild Women Do takes place at one of those great camps as well. So I really liked reading about that connection and seeing how she had written a book that was so completely different from mine, but had this common factor. And oh gosh, I read a lot of ARCs that aren't out yet, you know, for authors who want blurbs, so they're not necessarily out yet. But I don't know. I love books. Read a lot of things.
That's great. We always like to hear book suggestions. That's always fun. Also, can you share what you're working on next?
Yeah, so I'm working on my fourth book. Doesn't have a title yet. I'm actually approaching deadlines. I'm sort of scrambling to get it done. But it's actually my favorite part when you sort of the end is in sight and you know how it's going to end and you just want to like get it down. So this book also takes place in Southern California, on Balboa Island, which is part of Newport Beach. And this one takes place in the 1950s. And it's all of my books so far have been first person narratives from one woman's perspective. Now this book is different from me in that it's from the perspective of three different women, and it kind of alternates chapters. And there are three different women living on this island. They don't know each other at the beginning, but by the end, their lives become entwined. One of them is a popular, sort of like a socialite who lives on the island. Everyone knows her, everyone loves her, and she's very entwined in the community. One of them is a former disgraced tennis champion who is living on the island as a recluse, trying to hide out from everyone. And one of them is a young mother who's just moved to the island with her husband, who's having some marriage problems. And so, yeah, as the story goes on, their lives become entwined, and it's a lot of fun to write in the 1950s.
Sounds great. Is that published in 2025?
Hopefully, it will be coming out, yep, next summer.
Very good. That's great.
Yeah.
Very exciting. Is there anything that you could share that didn't make the book?
Didn't make the book. That's a good question. I guess just no specific event, I don't think, but with historical fiction, you do so much research, and there's so much that you could put into the book. I have pages and pages and pages of notes, and you want to put it all in, but you have to sort of do it with a light hand because you never want the book to read like a textbook. And so I think there were just like a lot of details about working in the airplane factories that I could have put more in, but it would have made it too heavy-handed. I don't know specifically what they would be at this moment, but there's always just so much research. And it's sort of sad sometimes when you see it on the cutting room floor and you're like, oh, well, save it for another book.
Okay, at this time, if anyone has any questions on Nicola, please follow the directions I mentioned earlier. If you prefer, put it in the chat and I can ask the question for you. Anyone have any questions? No.
That might mean that I talked too much, rambled on a little too much.
I have some more questions if no one else does, but if someone else had a question as well. Give me a little break, please. No. Okay. Oh, so when you were talking before, I was wondering what got you said your husband's grandmother, yeah, what had gotten her involved in becoming like, a riveter, like working in the airplane factory?
Yeah, so her sister was married, and her sister's husband, I think he was transferred from somewhere in Wichita, Kansas, something to do with airplanes, out to Los Angeles to Douglas Aircraft. And so her sister and her sister's husband moved. And then when her sister was out there, she took a job as one of the Rosies at the factory. And she was writing to her sister and she was like, come out here. There's these great jobs and they're paying really well. And, you'll be doing your part for the war effort. And so her sister went out. Grandma Ruth went out with her and ended up staying with um, her sister and her sister's husband. And actually, when I first started to write the book, I wrote it that way, that she had gone out, followed her sister out there, and then that just didn't work for me. So I changed it. But that's, sometimes you got to start with the real life and then branch off from there. And some of the real stuff doesn't make it in.
And how about the other ladies? They share how they decided to become like, riveters and working in the airplane factory.
Yes, one of them, Phyllis, I think, or was it Helen? Helen. She she loved airplanes and she wanted to become a pilot. And she just wanted to like get involved. And after the war was over, she ended up working with Howard Hughes. And she worked in the blueprint office with him and often sort of not didn't sort of brush shoulders with him, but didn't really like work directly with him. Um, I think she did something. I think she ended up flying a plane or going to pilot school or something like that. I can't remember exactly the details now, but she just loved planes and that's why she wanted to get involved. The others were a little bit more traditional. It was kind of like what women were doing, and they said that they'd done their collecting of like aluminum and then that kind of stuff, and then they really had the opportunity to go and do something that felt more substantial and more patriotic, and that's what got them involved.
Oh, that's great. Any questions at this time? Give you any ideas?
We back up a little bit to Montauk. Do you mind like doing a little bit more on your inspiration for that and the origin on that one?
Yeah, no problem at all. So Montauk, I got it back there. You've got it on your screen. So Montauk was my first novel.
I read that one. That was also really good as well.
Thanks. So that was my first book. When I lived in New York, I had a little beach house in Montauk, and when we used to go out there, a lot of our friends would go from the city. A lot of people go out to the Hamptons, but no one wanted to go as far as Montauk. They're like, it's too far, and we liked it that way because we were like, oh yeah, it's our own little private escape. No one will come out there. But then as the years went by, Montauk started becoming more and more popular, and I started seeing a lot of the like mom and pop shops selling up and moving out, and new fancy restaurants coming in, and all of a sudden you try to go out for like a casual dinner, which used to be like clam chowder or something, and all of a sudden you could not get a reservation at a restaurant. And I was like, oh man, this place is changing. And actually the place that we bought our little house from, he was a lobster fisherman in Montauk and his name was Billy. And when we started going there, and we'd meet some of the locals or go to the grocery store or whatever, and they'd say, oh yeah, where's your house? And we'd be like, oh, it's that one up on the hill. And they're like, oh yeah, that's Billy's house. And so for years, I mean, for as long as we had that house, it was always known as Billy's house. And I just loved that sense of like community and loyalty to Billy, even though he didn't even live there anymore. And so that was like the spark of the idea for me. I felt very nostalgic for the way Montauk used to be. And it inspired me to look back into the history of Montauk and how people first started going out there. And, I started learning about Carl Fisher, who was the developer of Montauk. And he first had developed Miami. And everyone thought he was crazy. They're like, no one's going to want to go to this swampland, Miami. And he developed Miami, which is what we know it as to be today. And so then he set his sights on Montauk, and he had this vision that wealthy New Yorkers would go to Montauk in the summer and Miami in the winter, and that was his like PR campaign. And so I just wanted to write about Montauk back in the day, and but really it's a love story. It's about a woman who is you know, having trouble in her marriage, and I always find it hard to describe this book without giving too much away. So you just have to read it. But there's a lighthouse. There may or may not be an affair. I got to figure out how to talk about this book without giving out away any spoilers. But it was my first baby. I loved that book.
Exactly.
Mhm.
I did too. I just was wondering, and there's a lot of like very incredible detailed research that I believe that you did, especially with the lighthouse and whatnot,
Yeah.
and the depth of that. I mean, not that it's not in Showgirl or in Hotel Laguna, but all of your books seem to dive very deep into iconic buildings or iconic events that definitely give the reader an immersive experience.
Oh, thanks. Thank you. Yeah, well, I did get to obviously tour the lighthouse, and the lighthouse. It's a lighthouse, and then there's two homes where the lighthouse keepers could live. Now it's automated, and there is actually a lighthouse keeper who lives there now, but he's more to like maintain it, and he does fundraisers and that kind of thing, and he just makes sure everything is good. But back in the day, there were lighthouse keepers who lived there and operated it, and so yeah, I got to do a lot of research about that.
I have an affinity to them but I don't know if you could see like all my nautical.
I love it. I love it. And I saw someone earlier is wearing a sweatshirt with lighthouse with 3 lighthouses on it. Who was that?
Yeah,
That's my Seattle friend.
that's fun.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay, yes.
North
I love that.
Carolina.
I love that. I was like, is that a coincidence?
Oh, I love lighthouses, and we have visited them all over the United States, and I just think magical.
I do too. I
Yeah.
do too. Have you been to the one in Montauk?
Yes, yes,
Oh,
we
okay.
did visit that. Yeah, I put it in
Okay.
the chat. Yeah, we did
Oh,
visit
okay.
that.
Sorry, I didn't see.
Yeah, I love them.
Oh,
So that really wasn't a question. That was really a statement. Although the origin, I didn't really know the origin. I knew a lot of the origin of Showgirl, but I really didn't know the origin of how you came up with Montauk. So thank you for that.
Yeah, thanks for asking.
yeah, no, that was very interesting. And I'll have to go back, well, because of Long Island, I'll have to go back to Montauk. I mean, I've seen the lighthouse, but I haven't actually gone, in the lighthouse. That's fun.
Yes, it's you got to do your squat workouts before, because you got to walk up all the steps.
Gosh, right?
The best view of Montauk, though, at the top of the lighthouse.
That's amazing. Since we actually brought up before we started recording, but you're talking about the Thursday authors, I was like, so maybe you should bring up a little bit about that.
Yeah, so the Thursday Authors is a group of author friends that I have. It's Fiona Davis, Jamie Brenner, Linda Leugman, Amy Popel, Susie Schnall, and then Susie Leopold, who's not an author, but she's became part of our group. She does book promotions and book tours for people. And so during COVID, a lot of our author friends had books that were coming out, and we wanted to help. It's so hard in those early days when books were coming out, and we're like, how is anyone even going to know about these books? They're not going into the bookstores, and so much else on people's minds right now. So we wanted to sort of help get the word out about these books that we're launching out to the world. I mean, you spend like a year or 2 or 3 or 5 years writing these books. It's so sad if they come out and then they're like, no one knows about them. So we wanted to help them get the word out, and we started doing author Zooms and just sort of trying to get the word out on its social media about it. But then what we ended up doing, these author Zooms every Thursday, where we would just chat with each other privately, talking about the book world and writing, and how we were doing with our writing and in these strange circumstances, and that kind of thing. And we talked about so many interesting things about publishing and writing, that at some point we thought, hey, you know what, we should share this. We should share these author Zooms with anyone who wants to listen in. And so we started doing some Facebook Lives, and we're on Instagram as the Thursday Authors. And sometimes we do live events together, and sometimes we do virtual events. And so, yeah, if you're on Instagram or Facebook, you can follow us at the Thursday Authors. And we love to cheer each other along in our writing process, and also other authors that have books coming out.
Yeah, I also enjoy the book recommendations. I see them every so often that you guys have.
Yes, every Friday we do what do we read at what our Friday reads, and also what are we watching, because that feels like research as well. What are we watching on TV? It's all part of storytelling. And I love that we do those, because I get a lot of my book recommendations from the fellow authors, and also TV shows. I'm like, what are you guys watching? I gotta watch that. And especially we like to watch a lot of, book to TV adaptations. Those
Yeah.
are always good. Or bad, but you still like to watch them.
Oh, can you also share how, if anyone wants to follow you on social media, how to do that?
Yes, I'm on Instagram and Facebook as Nicola Harrison Author, very original. And yeah, so you could follow along there. And also, if you're interested in signing up for my newsletter, I send it out very infrequently. But when I do send it out, I send out good stuff. So if you sign up, so you can go to my website, which is just nicolaharrison.com, and there's a little box somewhere on there that says sign up for my newsletter. And if you sign up, I have images. I'll send you a newsletter that has all the images of the art that was written about in the book Hotel Laguna. Because while I was writing Hotel Laguna, all the famous artwork that I mentioned that they were recreating at the Pageant of the Masters, I had a PowerPoint presentation going, and I would, put the images in just so I could reference them while I was writing about them. And so when I was doing a book club recently, someone said, hey, you know what, you should really collect all of those pictures and send them, put them on your website or share them with people so they can read the book and then look up what the pictures are. So now I have that in the newsletter. So when you sign up for the newsletter, that you'll get that.
Oh, that's a great idea, definitely.
Yeah.
Any other questions before we finish up?
I have to go and tutor, but thank you so much, Nicola, so
Oh,
much.
thanks for coming. Great to see you.
No, thank you for hosting this. Good to see
Bye,
everybody.
Debbie.
Okay,
Yeah, this has been so fun. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you. I love this. It's so much fun to talk about it and to meet you guys.
That was great.
Thanks for reading.
and
Yes.
so thank you, Nicola, for doing this virtual author visit for the Westbury Library, and we all enjoyed talking with you. Please join us next month when we speak to Alex Rickoff, the author of The Girls in Navy Blue, on Thursday, April 25th at 7 p.m. Good night to Nicola and all our readers and our attendees. Thank you again for attending.
Bye, everyone.
you.
Thank you so
Bye.
much.
Thank
Bye.
you. Bye.